So let's jump into the first of the three macromolecules we are going to discuss, and that will be everybody's favorite, the carbohydrates. Here's another great Bozeman science video from Paul Anderson. Enjoy. So carbohydrates tell you exactly what's in them: carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Each of those atoms form a specified number of chemical bonds. Carbon can attach to 4 other atoms, oxygen 2, and hydrogen forms 1 bond. And that becomes important because those are the components of the monosaccharides. They are single and simple sugars. Glucose, everybody knows about because that is the energy source that we use for our bodies. It's commonly known as blood sugar, sometimes called dextrose. Fructose is found in fruit, hence the name fructose. It's also found in honey. It is the sweetest of the monosaccharides, and monosaccharide is just a fancy way for saying the simplest sugar. Fructose is added to a whole bunch of foods in the form of the very addictive high fructose corn syrup. Galactose rarely occurs as a single sugar, in other words, as a monosaccharide. It is found in mammalian milk bonded to glucose. Galactose sounds a lot like lactose, so sure enough, milk sugar. So the carb family consists of those simple carbohydrates or sugars, and known as monosaccharides. They are single sugar molecules, and when you put a whole bunch of those together, you get more and more complex carbohydrates. In other words, starches and fibers. The other form of simple carbohydrates include the disaccharides, which are going to be made up of pairs of monosaccharides that are bonded together. We know that carbon, hydrogen, oxygen form carbohydrates, and atoms are going to form chemical bonds that follow the laws of everyone's favorite physical chemistry. Just a quick reminder. Let's talk about the disaccharides. Again, they are simple carbohydrates. You need to know the components of each of these disaccharides. So maltose is going to maltose will consist of 2 glucose units. So glucose and glucose make maltose. Think beer. So this is going to develop or form when you have seeds germinating and also during fermentation. Again, think beer. Sucrose is fructose and glucose combined. It is table sugar, so it is refined from sugar cane and sugar beets, very sweet. And remember, this is what is going to be used in high fructose corn syrup. It is readily available, and it is frequently used in many food products that are processed. Avoid those processed foods. I'm telling you, shop around the outside of that grocery store in the fresh food area, not in the outside of the grocery store that's made up of those snackable and craveable items. We already talked about galactose being part of milk sugar. If you add galactose and glucose, you get lactose. And again, it's found in milk and milk products. Remember, you need to know which of the disaccharides or which components form the disaccharides. There will be at least 1 unit of glucose in each of the 3. Then you just need to remember what the other component is. Sucrose is pretty easy to remember because sucrose is table sugar and that's really sweet. So sure enough, fructose and glucose is sucrose. And lactose sounds a lot like galactose. That's easy to remember too. And if you like beer, you'll remember glucose and glucose because of the maltose. That OSE ending means sugar. That shows you what they look like. Glucose, fructose there, sucrose there, and you can see there's a bond. So in this case, we have under these 2 molecules have undergone, what's the process? Sounds a lot like dehydration synthesis, also known as a condensation reaction, you betcha, in order to find this form that disaccharide. Glucose, we know, is the energy source for our bodies. It's got tremendous significance for the study of nutrition, and we'll be talking about that later in this section. We know that glucose is at least one of the 2 monosaccharides in every disaccharide, and it is the main building block for all polysaccharides, which include starch and glycogen. That includes starch and glycogen. Starch is the way that plants store glucose. Glycogen is one of the ways that humans store glucose. Actually, it's the main way we store glucose, because if you eat too much glucose, it's going to turn to fat. There are other sugars, including deoxyribose, OSE, means sugar, remember that. And you'll know deoxyribose because of DNA, and also ribose because of RNA. We've already talked about fructose being the sweetest of those simple sugars. It has the same chemical formula as glucose, but the structure is a little bit different. We know that it's going to be naturally occurring in fruits and in honey. And we also know that it's contained in a plethora of other highly processed foods. And you should put yogurt in there too, because most yogurts contain a huge amount of added sugar, especially if they are low fat. That low fat moniker is misleading, because when you take the fat out of foods, you remove the flavor. So in order for a product to be tasty after the fat has been removed, they load it up on sugar. Galactose, we've already talked about, seldom free in nature. We know that it's going to bind with glucose. It's going to form that mammalian milk sugar lactose. It also has the same number and types of atoms as both glucose and fructose, but once again, it's going to have a slightly different structure than glucose and fructose. We know what disaccharides are. They are pairs of those monosaccharides. The way that we bond single sugars together is through condensation reactions or dehydration synthesis. And again, we use hydrolysis to split those molecules down. Again, that is going to happen during digestion. Polysaccharides are the complex carbohydrates. That means you can find these molecules which have many glucose sugars. The ones that are important to us in terms of nutrition are glycogen. Again, that's the storage form of glucose in animals. We are animals. Starch is the storage form for glucose in plants, and fibers will be a structural component in plants, also made up of glucose. That shows you pictures of some of those. Now, glycogen, again, storage form of glucose, used for energy in animals. It's stored in the liver, by the way, and you have about 6 seconds worth of skeletal muscle contraction stored in your skeletal muscles. So where is glycogen stored? In the liver and in skeletal muscles. It is a whole bunch of glucose stuck together for storage of said sugar. It's not a significant food source of carbohydrates, and it's really not counted as one of the complex carbohydrates when we eat, but it is important to us for accessing so we can produce ATP. And it is produced by the liver from the carbohydrates you consume. Starches, we know, are a storage form of glucose in our plant friends. And you can have hundreds to thousands of glucose molecules all linked together by dehydration synthesis. And it's going to be found in all of those foods that we consider complex carbohydrates listed there. Dietary fiber is going to be very important. It can't be broken down. We can't break it down because we don't have the appropriate enzymes. And it's super important for plants because it's used for their structure. So the fiber that we eat, we can't digest because we don't have the enzymes. So it passes through our GI tract and doesn't get absorbed. We have two types of fiber in the food that we eat. There'll be soluble fibers, and if they're soluble, guess what? There has to be insoluble fiber also. The soluble fibers are more viscous, and they can be digested to a certain extent by intestinal bacteria found in fruits and veg. And the insoluble fibers cannot be broken down by that intestinal bacteria, also found in plants, but we're talking about grains and vegetables. Functional fibers are going to have health benefits. So sometimes they're added to food or supplements to increase your fiber intake if you are having a problem, dietary problem. Total fiber is going to consist of both functional fibers and dietary fibers. And although we cannot digest dietary fiber, it has a whole bunch of health benefits for the GI tract health as well as for the human body overall. And we'll be going over those as we go through this section, but let's just talk about a couple right now. Fiber helps keep your colon clean. Kind of scrapes along the walls of your large intestine and helps remove things that shouldn't be there. In addition, it can bind to cholesterol and pull cholesterol out of your circulatory system. You may know of someone who has cardiovascular issues who has been told to eat oatmeal for breakfast, and that is why.